It is great to be with you. Thank you for inviting me to join you. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time and visit with you this afternoon. You know, I got to say, I love tech. And I say that as someone who grew up in tech. My parents were both in the 1950s and 1960s computer programmers. My mom came out of Rice in 1956 with a math degree, went to work at Shell as a programmer in 1956. My dad came out of the University of Texas in 1961, went to work at IBM as a computer programmer. My very first job as a kid was in the tech world. My parents were both small business owners, doing what an awful lot of y'all do. They had a small business, a small tech company that did seismic data processing. It's in the oil and gas industry. They had written their own code, their own programs. They did seismic data processing, and they hired me as a computer operator when I was 8 years old. Paid me $1 an hour, which my dad said I was wildly overpaid. Now, these were in the days, this is the late 70s, and we would work on 5 Raytheon 704 and 706 computers. These are computers that filled the wall back with tapes and punch cards, and they had less computing power than you have on your iPhone right now. I've grown up in the tech community, and I've got to say, I admire the men and women who are gathered here. I admire what you're doing because, let me say, the internet has opened up extraordinary opportunities. Has opened up opportunities. What is it that makes the internet such a haven for freedom? Well, it's disintermediated the gatekeepers. When it comes to speech, used to be if you wanted to write a book, well, you had to go to a publishing house. You had to convince the publishing house to print your book. They printed it on giant printing presses. They put it on vans. They shipped it to Barnes & Noble. Now, if you got something to say, you can put it up on a blog. It can be read all across the world instantaneously. There's no gatekeeper in between you and the rest of the world. Used to be if you wanted to create a business. Now, it could be a high-tech business or it could be something pedestrian. If you're a little old lady who likes knitting sweaters for poodles, in the old world, you'd have to, if you wanted to start a business, you'd have to get a distribution system, you'd have to get an advertising system, you'd be limited to your local area unless somehow you found the ability to go national. You'd need warehousing and delivery, and what the internet has allowed is people to go directly all across the country, all across the world, free of the barriers of the gatekeepers. And as each of you has understood, because you're dealing with it every day, when gatekeepers are in place, they use that power to benefit the big guys, to benefit those with wealth and power, and to stop the little guys, the new startups. What the internet has done is it has been a haven for entrepreneurial opportunity, for entrepreneurial activity that has opened up opportunity all over the world. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that given the origins of what the internet has done, a very, very simple principle that I think ought to be respected across the board. You know, in Texas, we're fond of saying, don't mess with Texas. The principle I'm going to suggest to you is don't mess with the internet. The two don't mess with us caucus, and the remainder looking to be messed with. Look, let me talk about 3 different manifestations of that principle. Number 1, protect our rights online. We saw in Congress just a couple of years ago, SOPA and PIPA, and efforts to put government in place to start censoring and controlling what's said online. And I got to say, the tech community, it was phenomenal. Rose up overwhelmingly and said, protect our rights, and killed those efforts. You know, I'm proud to be one of the sponsors of the USA Freedom Act to end the federal government's bulk collection of our personal data. I'm joining with my friend Senator Mike Lee in that. With a host of Democrats, we came within 1 vote of getting that up on the floor of the Senate last year, and I hope we move forward with it. By the way, I will note, I don't know how many of y'all have your cell phones with you. I'd like to ask you, if you have your cell phone, please leave your cell phone on. I want to make sure President Obama hears every word we have to say today. We need to protect our rights. Protect our rights online, but a second principle is we need to stop taxes on the internet. There is, I'm sorry to say, a bipartisan coalition of politicians in Washington who are eager, who are salivating to impose an internet sales tax. If that internet sales tax passed, every startup on the internet, every mom and pop retailer on the internet would be responsible for collecting sales taxes in 9,600 jurisdictions across this country. You'd be responsible for knowing and collecting the taxes in the other states, but not just states, municipalities, counties, the Albany School District. You're responsible for knowing if their tax rate is 4.25% or 4.5%, and if they change it next week, you've got to change your collection. So you've got to monitor live, real-time, 9,600 different tax rates, and by the way, each of those jurisdictions can audit you, can demand your books. How are you doing collecting the Albany school zone tax? Now, why does this have so much momentum in Congress? Listen, the way politics works is real simple. This town, I'm sorry to tell you, there is a bipartisan culture of corruption. The reason the internet sales tax has so much momentum behind it is you've got a coalition of two groups. Number one, all the big box stores, all the giant companies that are major retailers, bricks and mortar, sent their lobbyists to Congress and said, hey, we want to impose sales tax on all these competitors. But the second component that a lot of people don't realize is if you look at the big online retailers, the largest online retailers, of the top 20 online retailers, 19 of them already collect sales tax in every state that has sales taxes. Because the standards, as you know, is if you have a physical presence in the state, then you're required to collect the tax. So if you grow big enough that you're a giant, you're an Amazon, you've got warehouses in different states, then you collect the taxes. But if you're a little guy, if you're just getting started, if you're that little old lady making sweaters for poodles, you're not required to collect taxes for 9,600 jurisdictions, most of which you have no vote and no say over the politicians that are imposing those taxes. Well, in Washington, that unholy alliance of the giant big box stores and the largest internet retailers, they're all getting together, and what have they decided? Hey, wouldn't it be great if we imposed crushing taxes on these little guys? Let's stop competitors from coming after us, and let's do that by putting taxes in place that they cannot handle. We need to keep the internet free of taxes. I'm going to give a third principle, a third application of the principle, don't mess with the internet, which is keep the internet free. Listen, a lot of y'all are in Silicon Valley, you're in Austin, you're in Boston. You're thankfully far, far away from Washington, D.C. And so you may not be as focused at just what a pernicious threat it is for government to get its hand on the internet. Yesterday, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, held a hearing on regulating political speech online. The Democratic chairwoman of the FEC said that the FEC needs to promulgate new rules to regulate political speech online, but because they're concerned some of you may go online and blog or comment on Facebook or share your views, and the government regulators aren't controlling your speech. That was yesterday. They don't like if you upload something to YouTube where you might have some political views. You might be sharing some political views. God forbid, you might actually be criticizing a politician. And then we all know about the FCC. We know that President Obama went on national television in praise of net neutrality. saying that he wanted the FCC to regulate the Internet under Title II of the Telecom Act. Now, Title II, as I think you know, was designed for public utilities. It was passed in 1934. FDR signed it into place. I want you to think for a second about the idea of taking an 81-year-old law and applying it to something no one could possibly have envisioned. When Title II was enacted, they were regulating old rotary telephones. Those are still regulated by Title II. This is not. I want you to think of what it means to be a public utility. Imagine every public utility you know. Now listen, there are folks in the tech community, quite a few folks in the tech community, that have been convinced net neutrality is a great thing and therefore that the FCC regulating the net is a great thing. I want to ask you, can you think of a single public utility anywhere in the country that is characterized by innovation, that is characterized by competition, that is characterized by anything other than staid, boring inertia, and that is characterized by anything other than government captured by the giant players in the industry? A couple of months ago, I observed that net neutrality is Obamacare for the Internet. Now, that attracted a bit of attention. It was interesting. Many of the people who were very dismayed at that comment, I kind of chuckled. My reaction was, well gosh, are you saying Obamacare is a bad thing? You know, it's interesting. The FCC has now rolled out its initial plan. It's 332 pages. Although when I say rolled out, that word has to be used lightly. Because you and I are not allowed to read those 332 pages. They literally have a book. This is how we're going to regulate the Internet, and by the way, no one gets to read it. One FCC commissioner held up the book and said, I guess you got to pass it to find out what's in it. Echoing Nancy Pelosi. Now, the tech community has been sold on net neutrality by being told the big bad ISPs are going to start blocking access, going to start regulating and shutting off voices. And listen, that would be bad. Now, I'll point out we've had the Internet for a couple of decades. There haven't been any federal regulators getting in the way, mandating net neutrality, and yet, last I checked, when I go on my ISP, I can access any darn website I want. The threat that's been sold, that big brother companies would suddenly start picking winners and losers, we haven't seen it manifest. And here's the way Washington works. They pick a threat that might trouble you. If I asked, would anyone in this room want giant ISPs picking which content providers would be favored and not, I don't think anyone would raise their hand. So they pick a threat that concerns you, and they use that to justify coming in and taking over. Reagan famously observed the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. I promise you, there is not a person in this room who would be happy if the FCC turns the Internet into a regulated public utility. The innovation, the creativity that has characterized the Internet from its dawn will inevitably be stifled. Now, Title II, by the way, gives all sorts of authority to regulate pricing in terms of service. One of the implications, if the Internet is regulated under Title II, is $11 billion a year in new taxes. I think the tech community needs to think about whether $11 billion a year in new taxes on the Internet is a good thing or a bad thing. Now, here's where the FCC says, no, don't worry. we won't collect those taxes. We're going to exercise forbearance. I don't know if you've heard the ancient fable about the frog who gives a scorpion a ride across a river. And halfway across the river, the scorpion stabs the frog. And they both sink under the water. And as they're going under, the frog says, "Why? Why? Now we both will die." The scorpion tells the frog, "Because it is my nature." I promise you, it is the nature of government regulators. If they have power, they will use it. 100% of the time it will grow, the taxes will come. So I want you to think, which has greater innovation? The United States Post Office or Facebook and Twitter? Which has greater innovation? Taxi commissions in local cities or Lyft and Uber? Every time you put unelected bureaucrats in charge of a market, they stifle innovation. And what they also do is they favor the big boys. If you think for a minute that the FCC is going to listen to small startups, then you're ignoring the history of every other instance of regulation. What has made the internet so incredibly successful? It has been the freedom. And so I would encourage each of you, do not accept the promise of Washington politicians who are telling all of us, if you like your internet, you can keep your internet. That promise cannot be trusted. And I hope that we all stand together defending freedom on the internet in every respect. Thank you.